Ah, fuck. What have I started?
We'll handle this.
We'll take the long way.
I watched Phantom Menace all the way up until episode 6. I kind of watched them in a reverse order. I watched episode 4, 5, and 6, and then I watched episode 1, 2, and 3, just because I wanted to do it in order of release date. And my golly gosh, was I impressed. Now, I have watched these films before when I was a young wee lad, but it's much different when you start watching them again and as an adult. You start appreciating and noticing a lot more things and connecting the dots with a lot more things. A good example would be, as a child, Mustafar was always my favorite scene where Anakin, gets the high ground. I just realized I said Anakin got the high ground. I 100% meant Obi-Wan got the high ground. I think we all know that, but yeah, this is just an after edit because I was retarded and I decided not to correct myself. Anyways, back to the video. That meme. But for me personally, I just liked it because it was a lava zone. But upon further review, I learned to appreciate a lot more of the lightsaber dueling scenes, even when they're in close quarters between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and how the fight is like 15 to 20 minutes, which is something I would argue is pretty rare these days when you see like a fight in a movie be like anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. Normally they do a few exchanges and then one loses and one wins kind of situation. Star Wars episode 1 through 6 kind of kept me on the edge of my seat almost the whole time. And when it wasn't catching me on the edge of my seat the whole time with the lightsaber duels, just because they look cool, not necessarily because there's a lot of stakes, it was very interesting watching certain characters' dynamics. Now, what I will say is that, of course, there are some issues, we'll say, with some of the older films. I'm actually going to take these off. Yeah, there's some issues with the older films. Not many, but there's obviously the Phantom Menace having force speed, where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan say, their line, and then they just literally fucking sonic break the speed force in the middle of the shuttle. And then there's obviously some not so great humor with Jar Jar Binks's, I guess, first iteration, because I believe that film was in, 1999? Sounds about right. So I assume that's the first time Jar Jar Binks was depicted on film, and yeah, his comedy wasn't great, but I do like the whole aspect of everything, because, 1999, if you don't know, I'm 21, born 2002, so a lot of these films, 4 of the films, were actually around before I was even born, and now looking back at them, it's almost crazy to me to think, those films were made so long ago. You have some of the OG trilogy made in, what was it, 1977, 1980, and 83? That's insane to me to think about. And they were not perfect by any means. Some of the costumes looked a little goofy. Some of the comedy didn't exactly hit. And specifically in the OG films, having Luke Skywalker, kiss his sister over and over again, thinking, something might progress with that relationship. A little weird. But outside of that, everything kind of fit nicely, almost like you were building a Lego set and everything was, getting to the final sort of, final battle, in a way, or a final scene where everything was just so cinematic, and I think that's a perfect way to explain the first 6 movies. All of them are just cinematic, whether it be the CGI looking fairly decent for its time, or the costumes being pretty well done for the most part. Everything about it, between the fights. Now, the older films did have a little bit less choreography than the newer ones like Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith. And then I struggle with movie names, if you didn't know. But yeah, basically, the 3 newer ones, 1999, 2002, 2005, those ones were all much more choreographed, or much better choreographed than the older ones, but outside of that, I think the CGI looked really good for the time, of course, and just everything clicked really well. You had Anakin in the Phantom Menace, and I can't remember this. Oh, the Clone Wars one. So you had Phantom Menace, Clone Wars, and Revenge of the Sith? Yeah, I think it's Revenge of the Sith. I'm pretty sure it's Revenge of the Sith. So you had the 3 films there. Anakin's story throughout the films, other than the midichlorian cell thing, which is, I think it's canon in Star Wars, but it's one of those things that's, like, not really looked at under a microscope sort of thing. It's kind of just like a blanket thing among lore, I guess you could say, where it's not really taken too seriously. But I think the whole idea is, like, more midichlorian cells, the stronger the Jedi is. But even in, you know, Revenge of the Sith, you saw Obi-Wan and Anakin be sort of matched in terms of force power when they did the whole fight and they pushed each other off. But other than that, I think the films did a really good job of portraying Anakin in a way that, like, makes sense for him to basically go to the dark side, you know, especially with the whole Palpatine mentioning how, it's not Malgus, who is it? It's his master. Fuck, I can't remember his name now. I can't remember his name. But, basically, Lord Sidious's master, really trying to think of the name. Plagueis, Darth Plagueis, that's what it was. Palpatine's master, Darth Plagueis, was able to manipulate the chlorian cells, and that makes sense on why, you know, Emperor Palpatine's able to make Anakin a Force baby in a way, and how Emperor Palpatine can live so long, because his master taught him the ways of doing that, and Palpatine basically implying that he can do the same with Anakin, and that being the only way he can save his wife at the time, from dying in pregnancy, which he had a Force vision of, and all of his Force visions up until that point have been spot on, like with his mother dying from those Tusken Raiders, or as they call them, the Sand People, which I thought was pretty funny for its time. But yeah, I thought they were really solid, really nice, and pretty ahead of its time for the filming industry, I guess, for episode 1 through 6. I thought they were all pretty good, and I'm really happy I rewatched them, to be honest with you. If you haven't watched them in a long time, I strongly recommend rewatching them. Some of them are absolute bangers. Now again, some of them do have goofy scenes. I'll be the first to admit that at least one time in each film, there was at least one, like, dumb sort of scene where it's just like people are being stupid. I think a good example is Obi-Wan and Anakin when they get caught in a ray shield in Revenge of the Sith, and they're like, we're not this wait a minute, we're not this stupid. How did we get caught like this? You know, moments like that happen occasionally through the films, but I would say for a film that's 2.5 hours, only having 2 minutes of bad dialogue or a little bit of a cringe scenario isn't necessarily the worst thing. Obviously the cringe thing is, like, you know, Luke kissing his sister and stuff like that in the older ones, but nonetheless, I think they are still bangers, and I think they hold up pretty well, and I think overall the Star Wars lore seems to have done pretty well at sort of incorporating the movies, or at least incorporating new films with some of the movies. Now, when I say media, I'm more or less referring to the Clone Wars as, like, the animated series, because I watched that maybe a couple of years ago, but I'm going to be rewatching the whole thing and getting, you know, my opinion on that. But now that I've finished episode 1 through 6, I'm going to have to sadly watch episode 7, 8, 9. I believe I've watched episode 7 once, but it was probably one of those, it was like years ago. I was probably looking off screen while I was on a side monitor or like a TV next to me, and I just wasn't paying attention. So I'm gonna rewatch it. I'm gonna really not like pick apart things, but just like look at it and try to take it for what it is. But I do know notoriously that episode 7, 8, and 9 are shit. So I will be looking at that, and I'll try to be, you know, non-biased, I guess, going into it. But it's really hard when narratives around movies are shit. Outside of that, I'm going to be probably moving on to the Clone Wars after that, or I'll look at, you know, Rogue One and Solo. I haven't watched any of those before. I've been kind of disconnected from the Star Wars media as a whole. Other than the Clone Wars and some Rebels, I just never really gave a shit about anything else. I've heard the Obi-Wan show is not that great. I've heard Ahsoka is a little boring. I've heard Andor. I did watch Andor. I watched half of it. Put me to sleep. I watched one season of The Mandalorian, and then I got bored with the second one. But I'll be going through and watching them all, and making sure that I go through all of them and get a fair opinion and assess the situation that Star Wars is in now. Just because I want to. I got some time on my hands. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but let's just say I don't have work right now. So I'm just kind of more or less delving into some things I was interested in as a kid, you know, Star Wars, Lego, stuff like that. And, you know, I'm just going to be watching through all the films. But that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Just wanted to get that out there. I wanted to basically document this so maybe I can go back and look at it under a bigger microscope after I'm finished watching all the Star Wars media. But I guess overall, what I'm trying to say is that if you haven't watched episode 1 through 6 in Star Wars, starting with The Phantom Menace, or if you want to start with, is it Return of the Jedi? Is it Return of a Jedi? I can't remember what episode 4 is called. Either way, if you want to start watching episode 1 through 6, you can watch them in any order. I think they're all really good still. I think they hold pretty well. You know, there's some goofy things about them, but you got to give them some slack. It was 40 years ago, you know what I mean? A little bit of a different story. Obviously, Phantom Menace being 20 years ago sort of situation. Over 20 years ago, actually. But, you know, other than that, yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I thought the films were still should be recommended under the GOAT tier of some of the greatest films of all time. Okay, maybe that's going a little bit far, but I do think they're good films, and I do think they're worth a watch. So, you know, we'll see how episode 7, 8, and 9 go with the Rey Skywalker series. But yeah, as a, I guess, returning Star Wars fan, so far, pretty happy with how the old movies have aged. And with all that being said, I want to thank you for watching this video. A little bit of a short one. Just kind of wanted to say that I'm going on track for something. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, made it to the end. I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.